In a small coastal town, there stood an old lighthouse on the edge of a rugged cliff. The lighthouse had been guiding ships safely to shore for over a century. The current keeper, Mr. Benjamin Gray, was a solitary man who had dedicated his life to maintaining the light. One stormy night, as waves crashed violently against the rocks, a young woman named Clara sought shelter at the lighthouse. She had been exploring the coastline when the storm hit, and the lighthouse was the only place nearby where she could find refuge. Mr. Gray welcomed her inside, offering her a warm drink and a place to dry off. Clara was fascinated by the lighthouse and its keeper, and as they sat by the fire, she asked him about his life and the history of the lighthouse. Mr. Gray hesitated at first, but then began to tell her a tale that had been kept secret for decades. He spoke of a shipwreck that had occurred many years ago, during a storm much like the one raging outside. A ship called the Sea Star had been caught in the tempest, and despite the lighthouse's guiding light, it had crashed against the rocks. Among the passengers was a young woman named Eliza, who was engaged to be married to a sailor on the ship. Eliza had perished in the wreck, and her fiancé, distraught with grief, had taken over as the lighthouse keeper, vowing to keep the light burning in her memory. That man was Mr. Gray. Clara listened, her heart aching for the love and loss in Mr. Gray's story. As the storm began to subside, she noticed something unusual, a glimmer of light from the sea moving towards the shore. Mr. Gray saw it too and stood up, his face pale. "It's her," he whispered. "Every stormy night she returns." Clara followed him outside, where they watched as the ghostly figure of Eliza emerged from the waves. She walked gracefully towards the lighthouse, her ethereal form glowing in the darkness. Mr. Gray approached her, tears streaming down his face. "Eliza," he murmured. Eliza smiled sadly and reached out to touch his hand. For a brief moment their fingers met, and then she began to fade away, leaving behind a feeling of peace and closure. Mr. Gray turned to Clara, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and relief. "Thank you for listening," he said. Tonight, her spirit is finally at rest. Clara left the lighthouse the next morning, the storm having passed. She couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude for having witnessed such a poignant moment. The lighthouse, with its beacon of light, continued to guide ships safely to shore, its keeper's heart finally at peace.